Hello, Bobcats and Stingrays. It's Mr. Fry again, and welcome to a presentation on the modern era or age. I will dance between the two throughout this presentation, I'm sure. But what it entails is the time from about the 1600s to about the late 1800s. And what I'm going to go over is how people found their fundamental needs at the time. You know the fundamental needs. I'll review them real quick for you. And also, a great invention of that age that really affected how people acquired their fundamental needs at the time, and in most cases, how you get them today. Um, let's go through right now through the fundamental needs real quickly so I'm going to review for you. Food. We all need food. That's the first one we had to master. Clothing to protect ourselves, mostly from the elements and sometimes just to make ourselves look good. Shelter. How to protect ourselves again from the elements. Communication. How do we talk? Face to face, long distances, makes a big difference. Transportation. How did we get around? We started on 2 feet and went quite far from there. And I'll show you how it's changed. And finally, defense. Unfortunately, sometimes we need to defend ourselves, usually from each other. And I'll show you an invention that really changed how that happened at the time. Right now, we're going to start with food. Food's good, and back then it was good too. Not a lot of processing to it. Really good fruits and vegetables. We had grains, we had dairy products, pretty much a lot of what we have now. They were very freshly made, and well, you'll find out why they had to be fresh. We had agriculture, of course. We had fields and crops. We had irrigation. We had a lot of these things. Eating was good for the most part at that time. It was good, healthy eating. And then this guy came along and made an amazing discovery. His name was Louis Pasteur, and he studied aspects of fermentation. Fermentation is when it sounds weird, when you take food and basically let it go a little bit bad, you let enzymes or bacteria take control of it, can actually change its chemical structure. It's how we make cheese. It's how we make beer and wine and many other products. However, if you let it go crazy, food goes bad. And he recognized this as well. He figured out a system. He figured out that if you heat up food really, not too high, but if you heat it up high enough, you can kill off some of those enzymes or bacteria that make it go bad. And then if you seal it really tightly, it stays that way. So if you had something you want to put in a can, you would heat it up until all the bad stuff was killed and then seal in the can real quickly. And then no more bad stuff can get to it. And it doesn't rot. It doesn't go bad. And that's why you can keep cans of soup in your shelf for a long period of time, because of this guy. It also helped in particular with things like milk. Milk goes bad really fast. You have a glass of milk and you leave it on your countertop. Leave it there for an entire day. You don't want to drink it when you go back to it. It goes bad really quickly. He figured out that if you heated up milk to a high enough temperature, it killed off those things that made it bad, and then you sealed it real fastly. Fastly? Yes, quickly. And you did it really quickly. It would stay good for a lot longer. Now, having said that, you still need to keep it inside something cold. Milk does have a tendency to go bad. Even with pasteurization, milk can still go bad if you let it get too warm. So the other great invention that occurred right near the end was a refrigerator. And before refrigerators, we had ice boxes, which is exactly what it sounds like, a very well insulated box with ice, and then you can keep things cold. But a refrigerator ran on electricity and keep things cold a lot longer. And that was awesome. Between the pasteurization, so you can keep things on shelves without going bad, and putting cold things into what this is, look at that, a modern refrigerator. Modern. At that time, it was modern. Food could be kept fresh much longer, and that was really good for people who want to store food. And so that really made food even more accessible to everybody. Building had not changed much. Bricks, wood, mortar between the bricks to hold together. That was pretty much it. Buildings got bigger. They got more complex. They learned to hold more people. But really, the whole concept of windows and doors and walls and a roof really didn't change a whole lot. You just found the rock that you wanted and you put it together and built it. They got better at carving them, but really not a lot changed. They did get very wonderfully articulate and artistic. as you can see in some of the cathedrals and many religious buildings. So the beauty, still lasted through the ages, but the concept of how to build them didn't change much until this stuff. What are these guys doing? Look to your right. Those are bricks, not rocks, bricks. They're made with the greatest invention to be blessed to construction probably ever, concrete. Yes, concrete. Concrete was basically it was a mixture that you could first in a powder form, almost like glue, and called cement, and you would mix rocks and things to it. The cement would harden, making concrete. It was like a liquid rock, is really the best way to describe it. All of a sudden, you didn't have to find rocks and shape them what you wanted to look like. You could just make them yourself. And that's what you can see on the right-hand side there, bricks. And so you could make all of these bricks just the right size that you wanted. And even better, you could pour it into shapes. In this case, look at this picture here. They poured it into the shape of a flat road. Yes, simple as that. A flat road made of concrete is just like a big flat rock. And they went, wow, we could pour it into this shape. We can pour it into this shape. It was amazing the things started to build. There are books out there you can find that basically state concrete. It's what America's made of. And they're not wrong. It's tough to find a building anywhere right now unless it was specifically made not to have concrete. They've all got concrete. And it's not just America. It's North America. It is the world. So concrete is everywhere, and it was invented during the modern era, and it totally changed the way things were built. Our shelters became amazing, and not only shelters, as you can see, dams and roads. It was a great invention. Clothing. Yeah, look at that, huh? Clothing, excuse me. Clothing was mainly made of linen and wool. If you had some money, you could use cotton, and if you had a lot of money, you could use silk. And these were in pretty good supply. And when you have good supply, fashion becomes very important. There's some men there, and they're old-fashioned. You may look at that and giggle. Oh, look what the guys are wearing. Trust me, kids. Give it another 30 or 40 years, you're going to look back at what you're wearing now and go, oh, I was wearing that. Yes, clothing doesn't change. Fashion does. And that stayed true to the modern era. Here's are some people. These are more common people, so they don't not quite as crazy colorful. These are very practical wearing here by these kids. There'd be rough and tumble kind of clothing that they would wear, and mainly again wool, cotton, linen. I don't think they had much need of silk. So clothing did run the whole gamut from very practical to very impractical. Inventions though that changed the way it was done around this time. They really mastered the loom, and when I mean this, it's a sewing loom that makes the textiles that you're going to wear, make your clothes, make giant swaths of cotton or wool. And you can see the picture here that they made giant machines that could do this. And they could change the patterns. They could change the way it was weaved. They could change the material. It was incredible. They now had giant swaths of clothing you can make. Because you don't want to make your clothing out of little tiny patches, this and that. You had a bigger piece of material to work with. You can make cooler stuff. So these looms were very big. And they constantly, through the modern era, they just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the making of clothing was not much of a chore. Sewing, though, you got your needle and your thread, you need to sew things together. That still took some time until we had an invention that rolled around then, a sewing machine. Not like sewing machines you have now, but the same concept. Do you see on the right-hand side there, you got a little handle? Well, they would crank the handle, and the needle would go up and down as they crank the handle. So instead of you doing this, it went up and down. All you do is push the clothing through, as an needle, and it would make your perfect little sewing line wherever you wanted. You could turn it, you could do whatever you want, as long as you kept on cranking. And someone, wow, I got one hand cranking here and pushing with the other. This is getting exhausting. So they put together one that you cranked with your foot, and your foot turned that wheel. So you had two hands now to move the material while your foot moved the wheel. So they got better at this. The sewing machine really sped up the process of making clothing, because it didn't have to be done by hand now. Now you could literally do huge lines of clothing very quickly. And they still use them today. Of course, they're a very practical machine. This next invention involves communication. and has been named, arguably, I'm not making this up, the greatest invention ever. That. It's called the printing press. And what the printing press did was it would take a group of words that you wanted to have printed. You would turn the thing, you would push it down, print them on a piece of paper, take the paper out, put a new one in, push it down again, take the paper out, put a piece of paper in, push it down again, and you could print hundreds of words at a time. Before this, if you wanted to have, you had a great book, you want to give it to your friend, you had to give it to him. If you want, him to have the book and you want a copy, you had to write it out. Yeah, can you imagine that? So books were all written by hand, big books. So this printing press allowed the manufacture of pamphlets, of newspapers, of books, of education. Because kids, when we tell you want to learn something, how do you learn so much? You read. But before the printing press, it was difficult to find things to read. You didn't have books everywhere. They were expensive. You didn't have newspapers. No one could write that many. The printing press gave us written communication for all the people. Everyone could learn. It was absolutely, you may say, the most educational invention ever made, of the printing press. Thank Johannes Gutenberg for putting it together. There were some ideas and some concepts before, but his was the first one that actually was patented and worked and became mass produced. This group of people here you see in this little black and white picture, they had the whole process mastered. We had some people picking the letters out. We had some people putting them together into sentences. You had other people that were doing the printing, and it all worked together. And you can see up on the strings there, you see things hanging off. Those are actually the pages drying, having the ink dry. Here's another one that would work faster and even better. We got really good at. They realized the importance of this. Literally, the masses of people were learning. Entire populations could be educated if they chose to be. It was fantastic. As a teacher, I'm like, yay! And here's one final version of the modern era. They, of course, had to throw an engine on it to go even quicker. That was right near the end. And so, again, if you want to have a newspaper or something like that, and you want it for entire population, you had to print out thousands of copies, and they eventually got good enough to do that, as you've seen today. There was one other form of communication that was just starting to come together near the end of the modern era, and it was invented by Samuel Morse, and it consisted of one little a telegraph on one side and on the other. Telegraph meaning distance writing, although it didn't write. It beeped or turned on a light. You would tap one side, and if you tapped it, the other side would go beep or turn on a light. If you tap the other one way on the top, the other one will go beep or turn on a light. You could literally communicate back and forth with beep, 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 or lights going on and off. The key was how long the beep was. You gave a beep or a beep, 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 and you could send a code to the other person. But we all had to agree on what the code would be. So a group of people got together and said, we're going to put together an international code that everyone can understand. And it was finally confirmed and invented by Alfred Vail. Alfred Vail produced this code and named it after the maker of the telegraph, Samuel Morse, and it was called the Morse code. And using dots and dashes, people communicate back and forth wherever they were. As long as that wire could reach hundreds of miles away, maybe pushing it, but a couple miles away, you have a really long line. Yeah, they would communicate with each other. Very cool invention. Transportation didn't change much. Is that a Roman chariot? No, but it works the same way. Same with that one there. Still had animals pulling carts on wheels. Thousands of years. That didn't change much. And the boats didn't either. They got big. They got really well made. Look at all those sails. But the concepts, again, you'll see this trend. Some concepts just don't change. Until this came along. James Watt created a steam engine. Now you look at that right now. That doesn't look like much of an engine, Mr. Fry. But what it is actually is you would create, there'd be a fire heating water, and the water would fill the little chamber you see on the right-hand side. And in that little chamber, as it heated up, it would push a piston up, a bar up, and that bar would make the other one turn up and down. And as that turned up and down, it would turn the wheel. So by using the pressure of steam, you would turn a wheel. Yay, that's exciting. It is exciting when that wheel is attached to a train. Very exciting. You can carry a lot of people long distances. All that smoke coming out, that's the fire that's inside, that's heating up the water, that's creating the steam. And all you're doing is turning the wheels. It's simple as that. And then you attach them to boats too. That round thing you see on the side of the boat is a paddle, and that paddle is being turned by steam. And again, the smoke coming out, that's made by the fire inside. Big fire to move a big boat. Here's another one. Boats got bigger, more powerful. You see there's two stacks on that one because they probably need even more fire to make that thing run. And the trains got huge, huge trains. Look behind the engine. You can see that gigantic container. That's all coal. As long as they keep shoving coal into that fireplace and keep that fire burning, they could make steam. As long as they made steam, the wheels turned. And they could go very, very long distances. They ended up having railroads across the entire continent, and being east to west. And why that's important is now not only could goods and services get across the entire country, so could people. There's literally almost no limit to how far you could go. If you had the money and the time, you could go anywhere in the entire country you wanted. So transportation made huge leaps and bounds in the modern era. Absolutely, literally as huge as you can get, one coast to the other. All right, we're on to the last topic, and this one's always a bit of a tough one for me. It's defense and warfare. It's never fun, but people have been doing it since we've been around, always bickering and trying to protect what we have and take what we want. So it has to be addressed. The only thing that changes is how we do it. And the big invention that really changed things in the modern era was this: gunpowder. Gunpowder is a mixture of charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate, which is also known as saltpeter. The charcoal and the sulfur burn, and the potassium nitrate has lots of oxygen in it, and that provides oxygen for the fire to burn. And what you end up with is, when you light it, you get a lot of flame really quickly. It was invented in China, and when it was first invented, they very quickly realized that if you put it inside of a tube and put something in front of it and lit it on fire, when the fire exploded, boom, whatever was in front of it shot out the end. The very first guns. Excuse me. And cannons. They even had early cannons too. So although it had been invented thousands of years ago, it really didn't play a part until near the modern era and the wars that happened around Europe and North America at that time. So when it came to Europe, it didn't take them long to start adding steel, iron, and wood to it, and made things like the first pistols or rifles. This one was called a blunderbuss. But what you have to take into consideration, kids, is that you had to reload it every single time. So you would put in the gunpowder, you would put in your projectile. They didn't have bullets back then. They usually have pellets. And then you would have to pull the trigger, which would turn down the hammer, which would light the gunpowder, which would shoot whatever you had inside of it out the front. And then you had to do the whole thing over again. You had to put the gunpowder back in. You had to put a projectile back in. You had to pull the hammer back. So it took time. But it was the dangerous thing about it is it could kill people from a long distance, and so it was used in a lot of the wars for exactly that purpose. And taking that consideration, the reloading, you would have rows of people like this, where the first one would fire and then duck, and the next row would fire and then duck, and the third row would fire. And while that was happening, the front row was trying to reload again. Old styles also prevailed. We had people on horseback with swords too, and again, war is never pretty, and it wasn't back then. I can't really describe to you or explain all of the wars that happened around that time because there was a lot. What I wanted to concentrate on is one war that had a very, very large effect. You might even say good effect on your life. It was the War of 1812. It happened in 1812. It was not Canada yet. The British were in the area that would eventually become Canada, and they were trying to expand, and you would call it a defensive war from the United States point of view. The United States were formed in 1776, so they were known as the United States of America, and they were protecting your ground. And the British came in and said, no, 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 we want some of this. It was a very large battle. It was a very costly battle. However, it was also what you call very decisive, meaning when it was done, everybody kind of said, all right, enough. And 3 years later, they formed this. You see that yellow line running between the, well, you see 50 years, about 50 years later, after that war, Canada, actually in 1867, became Canada. The British said, okay, guys, you can have that chunk of land. It's yours. We're going to call it Canada. And I wasn't around yet, but I would have went, yay. But what you see there, kids, that is a border from one ocean to the other. It is the longest peaceful border in the world. Peaceful meaning there's not guard towers, there's not walls, there's not barbed wire, there's no tanks or anything protecting it. There's no military there. It's peaceful. Oh, there are people that, check you as you go across. You have to be responsible. You want to make sure people going across are supposed to be going across. You want to make sure they're bringing good things back and forth. That's totally cool. But I'm proud to say that you in the United States and the people in Canada have the largest peaceful border in the world. We get along. And we can almost say we got along since after 1812. So it's one of those rare occasions that maybe there was a war, but we all settled down and said, you know what, that's enough. Let's communicate and let's get this settled. And we did. And that's where we're at right now. And I still, I'm very proud that it is still very peaceful and we get along very well. That's the end of my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will have some follow-up work for you and more presentations to come. Thank you very much, guys, and take care. This is Mr. Fry saying goodbye.